Going, guys? So today I'm going to give my presentation on the Stereopticon, A Tale of Two Screens by Charles Musser. So this is a picture of it on the left, and then in the middle you see it being projected onto a sort of cloth screen. Alright, so the central issue for this was that people were concerned that tariffs were either too extreme or not extreme enough. So the two parties were still Republicans versus Democrats, kind of like today, but there was kind of differing viewpoints. So Republicans during this time were actually focused on getting more tariffs or more intense tariffs, and Democrats were trying to get rid of the tariffs, which is kind of opposite of what we would normally see today. So this guy, Wheeler, was a ex-Democrat, so he became Republican, and he was also an ex-judge. So he switched sides because during the 1888 election, he felt like tariffs were the most important and pressing issue for Americans. He was a really well-versed orator who began to use the Stereopticon to visually extend his speeches and like kind of capture audience attention. So the Stereopticon itself is a slide projector, kind of like a powerful magic lantern, like kind of you can see in the bottom left, and it used two lenses to project photographs. Wheeler began to use this in his political speeches to show the historical background of tariffs promoted by people like Hamilton and other well-known early American leaders who people really listened to and like respected a lot. So those who criticized it actually called it like a peep show. So I don't know if you guys know about Edison's kinetoscope, which I think happened actually a little bit after this, but they started to describe it as like you look into a box and you see like an exotic lady dancing. So they kind of would like, it was kind of like a derogative way of describing it. So Wheeler's original lectures were called illustrated lectures because they used images, and that eventually became the Tariff Illustrated, which helped sway a lot of Democrats to switch sides during the 1888 election. So the two approaches to the Stereopticon, as it became more popular, both sides, Republicans and Democrats, began to use it. So the Republican approach, kind of like what we've been talking about, it appealed to the attentive spectator. It was more engaging and discussion based. I always kind of think of more of like a lecture for this approach, and then it focused on the truth of the photographic image and supplement to critical thought. So the other approach was the Democrat approach, which was more like flaneur based. It was focusing on those people just kind of roaming the streets more casually, walking by and just seeing the screen. So they actually used more methods by early advertisers, which appealed to random distracted audiences by using bright, colorful images. So if you guys remember Zibble and Metropolis and Mental Life, I kind of see this as like the precursor to that. So this is like the first billboards and like colorful flashing things that eventually led to what we have today, and like really colorful cities and things that we begin to become desensitized to because we're always trying to filter through the information in our brains, and this was kind of like the beginning of that. Obviously people weren't quite there yet because there was just like one screen in the city and everyone was looking at it and it'd go away, but now it's definitely a lot more intense. Alright, so in the 1888 election, the Republicans won the presidency and they began to build up the tariff laws. But at midterms, a lot of people were really upset because the tariffs were reaching like almost 50% marks. But still, Republicans go all in for the 1892 election. They really used the Stereopticon even more than they did before, and it was their main focus, whereas the Democrats actually shied away from the technology. Like I said, they were kind of calling it like peep show and like kind of stuff like that. So they stuck to newspapers, and they didn't really use the technology, which surprisingly actually still they won the election by a landslide, which you can see in this bottom right picture of the 1892 election and who voted for it. If it's cut off, the bottom right is all red, which is Democrat in this case. So yeah. New uses for the technology. Although it wasn't successful in helping the Republicans in the 1892 election, various news organizations began to pick it up because they would post normally election updates on bulletin boards, and then the people in the front of the crowd would have to like yell back, and then it'd continue like for blocks and blocks and blocks. But now with this new technology, they could just like cast it on the screen for a ton of people to see, so there was less like communicating back and back and back and back, and it was more just like here's the screen and everyone could read it. So yeah, they would also post like comical cartoons and images for the crowd to look at while they waited for more election updates, and this sort of concept helped develop film in the late 1890s and early 1900s into a type of political newspaper at times. So some more connections I thought of, in Internet and Society, we talk about the Panopticon. Obviously, it looks kind of similar to the word Stereopticon because it's kind of the same concept where the Panopticon is a tower in the middle of a prison where it can basically control all of the cells at once instead of having like a ton of guards at each cell. And the Stereopticon, kind of the same concept where it's one screen, everyone can look at it instead of like having to pass out flyers and stuff like that. So the Zimo Metropolis Mental Life connection, once again, the political billboards and the future of advertisements in cities. So Republican protesters would actually use light to try and stop Democrats from using the Stereopticon. And I kind of see that as similar to like how people vandalize billboards today, especially in like cities like LA. Like any Trump billboard is going to be like graffitied like crazy. So that was kind of a similarity I see from then to now. People still trying to vandalize and stop free speech, I guess. So using photographs, another thing I noticed was how Democrats or Republicans would kind of use photographs to encode Democrats as abusive towards women in factories, like in Europe. They would actually show pictures of factories in Europe and say, if we don't have more tariffs, this is what we're going to look like, and they want to do that to you. So it's kind of similar to how politicians try to like show the other as immoral, like smear campaigns. So on the bottom you can kind of see, this is like a more recent one, you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America. It's like kind of attributed them or encoding them with like danger and those kind of things. So, and here are my questions. So number one is, both parties have very different approaches in using the Stereopticon to promote their political stances on the issue of tariffs, one being to target more casual audiences roaming the streets, and the other to demand audiences' attention through more formal and intense discussions. Do you think one of these strategies is more effective today with more people getting news from social media? If so, how? And then the second question is, throughout the reading, people would try to defeat the other party by either overpowering the Stereopticon by using light to blind images, or at other times they would throw mud to stop it from producing images altogether. Do you think there are any ways that this sort of rebellion against opposing viewpoints is occurring today? Alright, thank you guys.